Now, the last part of our discussion on first dive into decision making is going to be about seeing and negotiating a bigger picture with narratives and sense making processes. So, just to briefly uh, uh, present the case study here, during COVID-19, we knew from the very start that pandemics are a huge threat to humanity itself. So there had been, for example, this paper in 2006 that had been presented in the WHO about how these novel pathogens, when they arrive in a situation where there is a lot of air travel, they can continuously find new hosts and are an extinction threat to humanity, because without such travel, they could have those aggressive pathogens might never have been heard of, because they just killed the local population and died off with them. And so we had during the COVID-19 pandemic, which is at the time of recording this video still going on very strong, and the excess mortality in Finland is still finding its peak. But so we had a lot of information, we had a lot of papers that were saying that the situation is going to be dire and the long-term consequences are going to be dire. But there was a sort of a consensus that was built around different expert communities, which were saying things like, okay, so pandemics just die out by themselves, or are not that harmful, or that it's impossible to be precautionary about them. Or it's too costly, and so forth. Whereas there were other literatures that were showing the complete opposite. And as one example, I was part of this this expert consensus on what we should do about the pandemic. And it became one of the most read papers in the history of scientific publishing, but it had next to no political impact. So what is sense making? So sense making is the act of structuring the unknown. So there are many definitions. This one on the top says it places the stimuli into some kind of a framework that enables us to comprehend, understand, explain, attribute, extrapolate, and predict. A bit simpler definition says that it turns the complexity of the world into a situation that can be comprehended explicitly, so in a way that we can transmit to other people and groups outside of our own. And one popular definition by Dave Snowden is making sense of the world in order to act in it. And here's the picture in the bottom with the elephant, the classic tale where 6 blind men are trying to figure out what they're dealing with. And so there's this one guy who says that it's a spear, and then another guy who says that it's a snake, and they're trying to figure out what they're dealing with in order to make the relevant action. And if you want to know more, the Wikipedia page for sense making is not bad, and it's constantly updated, so you might want to look into it. But so the roots of sense making are in social psychology, and but have since been less explicitly discussed in social psychology studies. So one thing that we use for sense making is the vehicle of sense making perhaps is the narrative. So narrative is a short story or a fragment that you might tell your colleague around the water cooler, or well, maybe that's more of a micro narrative. But these things used to be these stories that used to be told in campfires, or they grew so deeply into our cognition, uh, or they co-evolved with cognition, pattern seeking, and recognition. So that actually the how we see the world and how we make decisions is very largely uh, dependent on the narratives we carry with us, and they can also aid in decision making, and they're used in uh, communication, knowledge sharing, and storage. So you can one striking example of the storage potential of a narrative is to say that okay, so think about uh, the dyad. So there are two pieces of information. The king died and the queen died, and so those are two bits of information. But then when you say the king died and then the queen died of sorrow. Uh, you're actually, you have increased the information, but made it much easier to store in your head and in a narrative form. And during the pandemic, there were a lot of these narratives that were, so for example, there was the false dichotomy between having to choose health or the economy, and a lot of people were debating which one to choose, and whereas the economists were saying that they are actually the one and the same thing. So you can't have a well running economy without good health. So, and long COVID, even after the biological um, basis of it had been clarified. People still said that it's still in your head. Um, there was one time the idea that kids wouldn't be transmitting the virus, so we wouldn't need to do precautions for them. And we of course had this discussion about whether masks are depriving us of our freedom, and uh, and so forth. And so the one way of studying these uh, micro narratives is to use this a process that I will explain shortly. But the point of the micro narratives is that so you have the big data, which has um, sort of a large scale insight, and then you have the some people call it the thick data, which is about like interview material, for example, where you have a small sample and very contextually situated insights. And then you can have also something in between. So um, the idea is that the participant tells a narrative and then interpret it with the quantitative indicators. And so it's a survey method that's been developed in the field in private sector, and also it can be used as a tool for sense making community participation and research. So although it originates from action research in the field, it's been around for a very long time. So we can safely say that there's something about it that actually works.